All right, folks, going live in three, two, one.
Okay, we're just going to wait a few minutes as folks enter the room, and then we'll get started. We're going to just give 1 minute just as people are entering. Sorry for the delayed start. We had a bit of technical difficulties with our PowerPoint. Okay. I think we can get started. Folks trickle in. Just welcome everyone. Thanks for taking time on such short notice for this information session. You would have seen our email and social media go out that we have a new request for proposals. So we're hoping to kind of to go through that with you today. Slide. Should be wrapped up by 2 o'clock. For anyone who hasn't met me yet, my name is Simone Lilly. I'm the Director of Community Investment here with End Homelessness St. John's, and I'll be presenting today with my colleague, Jennifer Tipple, who's our Director of Strategy. Just a bit of housekeeping. This session is being recorded because it is such last minute, so we'll be posting it. You'll see that everyone is muted, but feel free to use the chat function for any comments. You can also kind of plunk some Q&As in the chat function as we go along. And when we get to the Q&A session, we'll address all those at that time. If we don't get to them all today, we will answer them on the RFP website where we're recording all the questions that were asked along with our answers. And if you think of any questions after today, you can also email us or use the Q&A function for the same purpose. Just a quick overview of what we're hoping to get through today. We have an hour together, well, a little less now, about 50 minutes together. The briefest of overview on End Homelessness St. John's and a bit of context of the RFPs to date. Then we'll kind of really dig into the different components of this RFP, and we will have a chance for Q&A. So for anyone who isn't familiar with End Homelessness St. John's, we are the community entity under Reaching Home, which is Canada's homelessness strategy. We are a system planning organization, and as it says here on the slide, we work with a vision in which every resident of St. John's has a place to call home. And we're hoping to be the next community in Canada to end homelessness. Our mission statement is here. Essentially, we exist. We're a sole purpose organization. The only thing we focus on is preventing and ending homelessness in St. John's. We work collaboratively with our community and our public system stakeholders, and we lead the coordination and integration of system-wide planning to ensure that St. John's can become the next community in Canada to end homelessness. So we're going to give you a bit of a context on the RFPs to date. Starting with back in the COVID response, there we go. It's a bit of an overview that you'll see there. It's kind of, we thought this might help just to kind of give you some context of where we are now and sort of the purpose of this RFP. The first one, some of you might recall back in 2021, and it was really a COVID response. That was our first RFP going out into the community at all. These were kind of just various COVID response projects that were funded with about $400,000 in terms of that investment. Then we launched a second RFP, which was also a COVID response. But this time what we funded were similar COVID response projects, but then there was also a second stream in that RFP that really focused on adding capacity and supports to the community. That was a cost-match partnership with NLHC at the time, and it was almost $1 million in terms of an investment. Then the third RFP basically built on that second RFP, and what we saw was really the value of the supports in the community. COVID response, that focus had finished, and really it was about investments, very specifically investments into the community, guided by the Community Advisory Board. And it was really, it was clear at that time that what was needed was support to access and maintain housing in the community. So we launched a third RFP, which then actually got extended for an additional year. And what that RFP did was it funded housing supports, kind of scattered site at various organizations in the community, with two different kind of types of positions. There was housing focused case management and there was rapid rehousing positions. So one was kind of a longer term focus and rapid rehousing was a shorter term focus. And really prioritizing chronicity and filling caseloads through the by name list. So, I mean, over the last 2 years, we've had up to 18 positions in the community. We've seen a ton of success with those positions and a lot of hard work across community organizations coming together, as well as kind of the work being done to support individuals find and maintain housing. So what we've kind of really done now is think about the success points of that last RFP, and now looking at our changed context and changes in terms of the rental housing stock and what's the need today. We're building on some of those success points and tweaking it based on what we've heard from the community, what we've heard from the community advisory board, what we've heard from stakeholders, and some of the outcomes from this project. Slide. So where we're heading now, we're going to outline that, but just underscoring that this request for proposals really is building on learnings, as well as kind of accentuating points where we saw a lot of success from the last 2 years, as well as kind of all iterations, I think, of this RFP. So I'm going to hand it over at this point to Jennifer, who can get into the nuts and bolts of this one.
All right, thank you, Simone. So as Simone mentioned, this is building on the learnings that we've had from previous RFPs. The purpose primarily stays the same. It is to fund housing supports to address the needs of people on our by name list of all known folks in St. John's who are experiencing homelessness. And that list is getting better all the time as we get better information from our community partners. This is also to meet the mandatory reaching home community level outcomes, which are covered on one of the very next slides. And specifically with a focus on chronic homelessness. I'm sure everyone on this call is aware of the housing shortage here in Newfoundland and Labrador and in St. John's. We see it all across the country. As per our reaching home mandatory outcomes, we do have a focus on chronic homelessness, but it's also worth noting that the percentage of folks who are experiencing homelessness who are experiencing chronic homelessness has actually significantly increased. And this started as a result of the pandemic and continues now with the housing shortage. So to address that, the level of needs of folks experiencing homelessness, we are as well focusing on an assertive engagement approach, and that's to make sure that community agencies are actively engaging with participants and meeting them where they're at using a trauma-informed approach and really focusing on and addressing the needs of the folks that we serve. So our funding source for this one is 100% federal funds through the Reaching Home Canada's homelessness strategy. And let's click to the next slide there. And this is one of the reasons why it's so important for us, of course, to address those mandatory reaching home community level outcomes. So I'll just flick over them really quickly. The first one is to reduce chronic homelessness in our community. The second is to reduce homelessness overall, as well as for specific populations that we as a community choose, which must include Indigenous homelessness. As of now, we haven't chosen any specific populations in addition to just general homelessness and Indigenous homelessness. Also that we reduce new inflows into homelessness. And the counter to that is reduce returns into homelessness as well. So if we're doing all 5 of those things really well, then that means that we're making a significant progress towards our goal of preventing and ending homelessness in St. John's. So what that means all in all is that we're striving to ensure that when homelessness in our community, when it exists, is rare, brief, and non-recurring. It doesn't mean that homelessness will never exist in our community. That's pretty much impossible. There will always be homelessness, but we're striving to create a systems-based approach where when it does exist, it is rare, brief, and non-recurring. We also place a strong focus on housing first, not just from a program response, but from a philosophy in general. And what Housing First tells us is it affirms that stable housing is a primary need, and that any issues that folks have, whether they be substance use, mental health, or whatever, can be best addressed once this need is fulfilled. As in, people don't need to prove that they can live successfully in housing in order to be housed. No, none of that. This is the first step, is housing, and the rest follows from there. So that's reiterated. This definition is from the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. It's reiterated in Reaching Home, and it's best practice around the world for preventing and ending homelessness. So the timeline for this, we're looking at, we have positions in place now through the previous RFPs. So the official start for this particular RFP will be April 1st, 2024, going to March 31st, 2025. And just as in previous RFPs, it's a condition of our own funding. As per Reaching Home, all projects must be completed and funds spent by March 31st, 2025. And we're, of course, similar to previous years, we are looking at the possibility of extension for this project. So let's get into some of the requirements. Now we're talking about the things that we would be looking to see from proponents who would be submitting applications for this funding. So here are a list of the requirements that obviously they're things that agencies must have. Number one is an active MOU with us, either that they will sign one or that they will renew their existing one with us. The second is integration into coordinated access to homes. This is kind of our one-stop shop for matching folks to services using triage and a common assessment tool to assure that folks experiencing homelessness are treated with fairness and equity, and that nobody falls between the cracks, that people are matched to the supports that they need. Number three is integration with HIFIS 4.0. HIFIS is the Homeless Individuals and Families Information System. This is the latest version. It's developed by the Government of Canada. 4.0 is a web-based version which enables sharing amongst community partners to provide a better experience for individuals and families experiencing homelessness. They only have to tell their story once, and also a better experience for service providers because they can share information amongst them for a better service experience for end users. So we do require integration with that. The fourth is good standing with the EHSJ. This is relative to any previous successful proponents for us that that you've fulfilled all criteria in the past. The fifth is sustainability. What this means is that organizations, proponents have the necessary infrastructure to support a project like this in terms of, human resources capacity, oversight, policies and procedures in place, those types of things. The sixth is really important. It's become more important, certainly since COVID times, is the ability to meet folks in the community. So this is going back to what we said earlier, meeting folks where they're at, whether they're in emergency shelter, whether they're sleeping rough in tents, or anywhere in the community that, assertive engagement approach to meeting folks where they're at. And as well, number 7, this applies to previously successful RFP proponents, and it's a demonstrated ability to have met the outcomes of the previous RFP. So our framework, like Simone said, I mean, we've done a lot of consultation on this with existing proponents, what's worked, what hasn't, with staff, with supervisors, with our community advisory board, with our End Homelessness St. John's board. And, the homelessness is evolving all the time, and we have to be nimble in response. So we're switching our approach a little this time around to focus on 2 key activities. So the first activity would be that housing access piece, and that means finding housing for participants. The second piece, of course, is what happens after that. Follow-up housing support. How do we maintain housing for participants? How do we support participants to stay in their housing after they've been housed? So proponents are requested to submit applications that demonstrate their strength in one or both of these key activities. So we'll get into a little more detail on this as we go along, but basically agencies can apply for one or the other, or they can also apply in a team approach or partnership approach with another organization to demonstrate how they will meet the needs of participants across the spectrum of those two activities. So a few more details on the housing access part. This would be typically short-term engagement, 3 months or less. We know there are always exceptions to that rule based on, for example, accessibility requirements that are harder to find. But in general, we would estimate 3 months or less in order to house participants quickly and then move on to new participants. So that's kind of keeping that churn, being able to meet folks where they're at, you know, that participant engagement piece, the initial meeting to determine needs and to get to know your client, housing readiness activities, which of course are making sure that folks are connected to income support, that they have application into NL housing, into the city of St. John's, if applicable, that they have their income taxes done, all that stuff, because that, of course, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure there, as well as the housing search part, obviously. And then as part of that is doing housing viewings and meeting landlords. And then the housing setup part, once clients do move in, just setting them up, you know, the utilities and all those things that need to be in place. And then initial referrals, and some of those programs that we would be referring folks to do have a lengthy wait list. So of course it makes sense to get folks on sooner rather than later. So that's that part. And I mean, there is a gray area now, flipping the slide to the next one. It's not like, you know, you just put someone in a house and then move magically on to the next stage. There's a bit of a gray area there, a transition period as well. So we would be looking for agencies to have an approach that would support clients through that transition period. Then the second phase would be the follow-up housing support. So this would typically be longer term, up to 24 months. And this is the focus of this is to enable participants to achieve ongoing housing stability. So we've got folks successfully housed. How do we, you know, remove the barriers to housing instability and build up the skills required to keep folks successfully housed? So that would be relationship building with the client. Doing regular in-home visits is really important there. Individual support planning, which of course is directed by the individual, self-sustainability and strengths-based approach. Basic life skills, whether that be hygiene, cleaning, cooking, things that the individual identifies for themselves, as well as things that are designed to remove the barriers to housing instability. Helping the individual to build up their support systems and relationships, both formal and informal, with their landlord, friends, family, with other referral agencies. Risk assessments and safety plans, a couple that come to mind, of course, for us that we've seen based on trends in the past is, for example, guest management issues, like how do we prevent home takeovers, things like that. And then finally, a sustainability plan. And this is, you know, tapping into the strengths-based approach of working with an individual and what they see for themselves moving forward, even once they've moved on from these supports. How do we support them to keep their housing stability? So as I mentioned before, you know, it's not like this is black and white. You do housing access and then that's done and you move on to housing focused support. That's not how it works. There is a warm transfer, kind of a gray area in there. So we're looking for proponents to outline how they would intend to ensure that the warm connection between the activities is made early with the participant, so that the participant feels supported and then they have a relationship with both sides of the equation and they don't feel that, you know, they're losing a connection with one person and then being put to someone else. There should be more of a warm process there. And then like I said, warm transfer processes in place once the participant is housed and they're moved over to that. So we'd be looking for that from proponents. So choosing your approach. I mean, it's a choose your own adventure here. We are certainly available to guide you if you wish. Of course, any questions that we ask will be shared publicly on our RFP website, but feel free to ask if you want clarification. So you can apply for as many positions as you want, basically, either in housing access or follow-up housing support, or both. Like I said, we do emphasize, we encourage teams and partnerships to be able to provide that support across the continuum as well. That'll definitely strengthen any applications. We'd be looking for proponents to tap into their organizational strengths. We've got so many great players working in the homeless serving system. So what's key here is your ability to leverage your own organization's strengths, and where possible to identify and mitigate any challenges that we focus on in our work every day. The next one would be continuity in service delivery. This is really important for the sake of the client's experience. Experiencing homelessness is difficult enough in itself. When we do match supports to a client, we want to ensure that there's a seamless experience for folks and a really good experience. So what we'd be looking for is a plan for staffing turnover or prolonged absence. We know that these things happen all the time, and we just have to have a plan in place for them. Rematching participants should really be a last resort as opposed to, part of the actual plan. The next one there is problem solving. There's a few examples in the application itself, but basically how proponents will address situations such as, once the participants become housed, what happens if what happens if they become unhoused again? How will your organization kind of handle that from a, again, that transition from housing, follow-up housing support and housing access? Because we all know that clients, that road to getting stably housed sometimes requires a few stops and starts. And then what will proponents do with clients who disengage from supports? That's another big one. So you'll see a couple of examples there in the application form. In-kind resources, how will the proponent integrate existing positions and resources into their application? And then finally, if organizations were successfully funded through the previous RFP, 2022-24, what's their approach there in terms of extending existing staff? And we will note here that this RFP can't be simply perceived as an extension of previous positions. We've already outlined how it differs significantly from the previous RFP. So we are encouraging, we would like, where possible, to extend existing staff, just recognizing that key difference between this RFP and the last one. So proposed roles and responsibilities, these are just a few things we plucked off the list, but for the full guide, for the full list, see the RFP guide on page 6. So I've already mentioned a few of these. We strongly emphasize the housing first philosophy, the importance of relationships and building trust with clients, strengths-based approach, knowledge of the Residential Tenancies Act is very important from the sense of, being able to mitigate some of those housing barriers, hopefully even before they arise. Assertive engagement, we've already talked about that a couple times, is really important. Harm reduction for sure, trauma-informed practice, cultural humility. These are a few of the things that we would like to see in the staff positions. Now, a bit of information about just comparing and contrasting the approaches for both. So number of available positions that we have in both categories, that will be determined based on need, as well as based on the applications that we receive. So stay tuned for that. Position titles and profiles, we would be looking for position titles that recognize that these are housing focused positions. So, the word housing should be in there in some way, shape, or form. Housing access worker, for example, or follow-up housing support worker, or an equivalent term. Participant profile for housing access, it would definitely be participants experiencing homelessness, which, you compare that to follow-up housing support. We'd be working with folks who have already been housed, working on their housing stability. Types of supports, we just covered that actually in a couple slides ago, so you'll see more details on there. In-person requirements on the housing access side would be minimum weekly in-person visits, and that goes back to meeting folks where they are at, whether that's in a shelter, in private shelter, in an encampment, in a tent, sleeping rough. That would be the expectation there. On the follow-up housing support side, we'd be looking at minimum weekly in-person in-home visits. And that can be reduced to monthly once the participant has achieved a certain level of housing stability. Length of stay, we mentioned this before, on the housing access side, it'd be typically more short-term compared to for the follow-up housing support side, we'd be looking at longer term of up to 24 months, which would be required to achieve ongoing housing stability. And then finally here, just speaking about the onboarding requirements for each. On the housing access side, we will be providing an orientation with the CAA outreach team, which will focus on in-person visits in different settings, like I mentioned, shelters, private shelters, tenting, etc., as well as those housing readiness activities. And on the follow-up housing support side, onboarding requirements would include an orientation with the In-Homelessness St. John's Home Connect team. Kind of go through the motions of in-home visits, what they look like, and common barriers to housing stability. All right, so what to expect from us? We expect a lot from you folks, but of course, in return, we are always happy to shore up our end of the bargain. So what you can expect from us in terms of overall community supports is ongoing support through coordinated access to homes, which I mentioned before. So we have a number of standardized protocols, which are also mandated through Reaching Home, and that those are about all our activities with respect to triage, assessment, matching, the whole works. So that provides a lot of structure around what we expect from our proponents, but it also gives our proponents an idea of what to expect from us as well. Our updated by name list of folks experiencing homelessness in the community. Oversight by our Coordinated Access to Homes Working Group, which reports through to our Community Advisory Board, the CAB. So this is one of the major ways that we seek ongoing engagement from the community. We're not making decisions in isolation. These are community decisions. Quarterly community planning sessions. Those are to get feedback from folks on what's working, what's not, and how we can best support the community, whether that be through Q&A sessions, training sessions, information sessions on programs that we offer, information sessions on programs that are offered through other agencies in the community, all sorts of things, as well as HIFIS 4.0 implementation and support. We also provide support through our participant outcomes, and this has been really helpful. The feedback that we've received from community is this is really helpful to see the work of communities kind of reflected in the mirror through coordinated access to homes and the by name list, where we're actually able to make an impact. And this will be even heightened through HIFIS 4.0 as well. We'll be able to use our real-time learnings to see the data and to evaluate our own effectiveness as a community. And one of the ways that we do this is through our public dashboard, which is on our website. It's a kind of a visual depiction that we update monthly of our progress towards ensuring that homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring. And I mentioned before, in terms of our housing support resources, we have our Coordinated Access to Homes outreach team, which works closely with the Newfoundland and Labrador Health Services Harm Reduction team. We also have our Home Connect team that provides supports to match clients and landlords in the community and then provide supports through community agencies, and our supported referrals program, which is a short-term one-stop one-time funding source for things such as the balance of folks' security deposit that's not covered through income support, utilities arrears, rental arrears, all that. Those would be available through to our successful proponents and well, anyone who's engaged in the coordinated access to homes process, as well as support with navigating the community, landlord engagement, et cetera, et cetera. Our staff are a valuable resource on all sorts of things with respect to housing and homelessness, and we're always happy to provide support to our partners. So that was in general. Our specific supports for these funded positions would be proponent onboarding process, which I mentioned part of it, but yeah, also to complement our service agreement as well as our MOU. And what we expect with respect to reviewing our caseload model, reporting, all that. There are some things that we will be pretty strict on that are, you know, in line with coordinated access to homes, as well as our expectations through Reaching Home. And as well, we'll be providing activity-specific orientation. So as I mentioned before, with the CAH outreach team, we'll be providing orientation to the housing access positions, and through Home Connect, we'll be providing orientation to the follow-up housing support positions. We also provide training, education, and professional development to all our partners, whether they're RFP proponents or not. And these are always provided free of charge. And they are prioritized through the any learning opportunities, training are all prioritized through the Coordinated Access to Homes Working Group. And finally, we will be providing support for agencies through that transition from the last RFP to this RFP. So that's for agencies in general, as well as staff and their participants. And of course, the goal here is to ensure minimal disruption in supports, particularly for participants, maintaining a focus on that equitable approach and making sure that folks have that continuity of service, even as we transition from one RFP to the next. Okay, accountability and reporting, almost to the end here. I want to make sure we have lots of time for questions. So from a financial reporting side, we're looking at the same as before. This is on a quarterly basis per Reaching Home, and this is in line with what's required of us through Reaching Home. We also require activity reports to be provided on a quarterly basis. This is both outcomes and the narrative report. In the past, it was simply a narrative report, but in alignment with what's expected of us through Reaching Home, we are requiring outcomes. And a note on the outcomes, for example, number of folks housed, et cetera, they should match what is provided through the Coordinated Access to Homes reporting, which I will talk about now. So what we require as part of participation in Coordinated Access to Homes is that agencies and staff provide the intake forms to us on the clients that they're working with, as well as weekly caseload updates in the provided format. So those would be things like updating us regularly, weekly, on things like your caseload status, your housing status, which clients have become housed, which ones are still remaining homelessness, which ones have maintained their homelessness, etc. And where applicable, entering client data into HIFA 4.0 in a way that aligns with the agency's participation. So project costs, we're looking at, this is all included, of course, in the guide, a maximum of, per position, we're looking at a maximum of $65,000 for salary base, plus up to 20% MERCs. And so that would be a total of $78,000 in terms of staffing costs per position. Project costs, those would be things like mileage for traveling to see clients or insurance for your vehicle, etc. So that's a maximum of $500 per month per position, which would be $6,000 annually max. Direct client expenses are not applicable in this particular RFP because any of those should be directed through supportive referrals. Administrative costs, where you provide a maximum of 10% of total approved funding. Just the caveat is there that they must not be funded elsewhere. Like, for example, organizations that have a Government of Newfoundland and Labrador multi-year agreement, that it's not applied to those costs. Oversight and management, it's not applicable to apply for direct costs in there, but of course, administrative costs can be used towards those if that is what the organization wishes. There's also an opportunity here to indicate an in-kind contribution, and if so, please provide the funding source for those, whether it's GNL multi-year funding or a different source of funding. And finally, other organizational supports. If you have complementary positions within your organization that are able to support housing work, please feel free to include them to as an in-kind contribution to bolster your application and as well indicate the funding source. So what that works out to, a maximum of $92,400 per position. And of course, like we said, you can apply for multiple positions, and that would be based on 12 months. So if we're looking at less than 12 months, obviously that amount would be prorated. Okay, I'm going to pass it back to Simone now to talk about the evaluation criteria. So over to you, Simone.
And I'm not going to read out each of these individually. It is indicated on page 11, kind of in the guide. But I think what I want to highlight is that evaluation criteria has been predetermined and has been provided to you in advance. So you can keep in mind these requirements as you fill out your application. And in terms of our evaluation process, I think that's kind of just the important note here is that we, based on that criteria that we've just provided, We are actually relying on a new committee that has just been created as a subcommittee of our Community Advisory Board, and it's a Proposal Evaluation Assessment and Review Committee. And essentially, it's members of the CAB that are not in conflict of interest with this funding opportunity or any funding opportunity that would come and evaluate all of the applications based on that criteria that we provided and provide us with their assessment and of successful projects. In terms of a timeline, we're always a little bit tight in timelines with these projects, usually based on our own confirmation of funding. So the RFP's been released. Today's the information session. We're giving until January 22nd, recognizing that there is a holiday break there for submissions. We will be assessing those as quickly as possible, knowing that this is quite time sensitive for many with current positions in particular. And in February, we'll make the announcement of the successful proponents. Project start date would be the fiscal start date, which is April 1st. And it is for a year with the potential for extension. There's a few additional resources here. They're all included in the guide or on the End Homelessness St. John's website. In terms of applying, there's a application form that you can fill out in Microsoft Forms. You are able to start it and save it for later if you do want to edit it. There is no separate budget form, it's included. And when you submit it, we will follow up with you. So you will get a confirmation email from us. And we'll be sending you a declaration page for official signature. If you have any questions, again, you can ask them today. You can submit it on the RFP website. There's a whole site specifically for that so that others can benefit also from those answers, which is shared here. And now we have about almost 20 minutes to be able to answer some questions. You can use the Q&A. We'll give you a couple of minutes to populate those questions, and we'll take it from there. And if there are no questions, you can always get out early as well. Feel free. We'll give probably 5. Oh, we've got one coming in. What would you consider to be a successful current RFP position when reapplying for the new year? So in terms of, I mean, I can take that one on. I would say based on the reporting requirements, as well as being able to demonstrate outcomes over the quarter. So we do ask specifically for caseload updates in terms of move-ins, and we're able to kind of look at those move-ins across the cohort. Also kind of the responsiveness, I would say, you know, it's not just about move-ins, but also keeping individuals housed is also just as important. So knowing that a caseload and current proponents may have many individuals that are housed, we're able to know that and able to see kind of that follow-up support. I'd also speak to the other requirements of the RFP, the current RFP, which are kind of the assertive engagement, the ability to go out consistently in person, to go meet individuals where they are, whether it's in shelter, unsheltered, and the follow-up in-house visits. There were several key components and requirements of the RFP. So it's ensuring that those components were met. And Jennifer, I don't know if you have anything else to add on that one. But...
I think you did a good job of covering it. Yeah. Yeah, I guess the only thing we could just re-emphasize, we did mention it. I mean, this is a fairly significant difference from the last RFP. So making note of that and ensuring that if you are continuing current RFP positions over, just to indicate very strongly how they do meet the requirements for this RFP. Any other questions? Like we said, feel free if you think of something after the fact, feel free to post it on the website and we will answer all of those publicly as well. Oh, we do have another question here. Are we able to share what is the total funding allotment for this RFP? We actually were anticipating when we released this RFP that we wouldn't even have confirmation of our federal funding. And we did get it, not in time to include it in the actual RFP guide, but yeah, but we still haven't determined exactly what the total funding allotment will be. But what the good news is, it does give us more flexibility in terms of what the response that we're able to provide. So I'd say stay tuned. It'll depend on the total funding allotment that we decide upon will depend on the types of applications that we receive, and I'd say we'll go from there. Simone, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, we can give you a bit of an estimate. It'll look very similar to what we have right now. That's been allotted to the last 2 years, so approximately in that 1.2 range.
Yeah. Well, maybe what we'll do is, yeah, we can, unless anyone has any last minute burning questions, we'll just invite you to visit the RFP website, and the answers to this will also be posted there. So you don't have to watch the whole webinar again in case you're curious to see those answers. We really thank you for your time. I know that it is 5 days before Christmas, which feels bananas right now. But yeah, like Simone said, it's just the nature of when we get confirmation of our funding and all those things, we always end up compressing this pretty tight timeline between Christmas and end of fiscal year. So we really thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar today. And by all means, feel free to follow up with us if you have any questions or concerns about anything at all. If you have trouble filling out the application form or anything like that. Just keeping an eye for any last minute questions, and it looks like we are good. So thank you again, everybody, for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day and have a lovely holidays.
Thanks so much, folks.
Thank you.